Good evening, Mercer Island community, and welcome to our budget presentation and webinar. We will try to make this as exciting as possible, but this is a great opportunity. My name is Fred Rundle. I'm the superintendent of our school district, and this is the first opportunity of what we hope to be many, where we continue to reach out to our community and share what's happening in and around the district. Tonight, our focus is really on our budget. And I want to begin by saying that this is not a story of doom and gloom, and this is not a story that is unique to Mercer Island. But what it is a challenge ahead of us, and one that I know we can overcome and continue working on together. I'm joined tonight by two educators who just happen to also be financial wizards, I should call them. We have Director Matt Sullivan and Director Kay Adams. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, Matt Sullivan, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Hi, Kay Adams, Director of Finance.
And both of these colleagues are new to Mercer Island. Matt joined us just after the start of the school year in September, early September. And Kay, are we on week 6 now that you've been with us?
Seven.
Our 7th week. I'm thrilled to have them as part of our team to really help us navigate. They both come with tremendous knowledge, both in the public sector, outside of education, a little bit in the private sector, but they've spent the majority of their careers, especially in the last several years, in a neighboring school district. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, tonight is not about trying to create a doom and gloom picture of our school district from a financial standpoint, but really to think about how are we going to stabilize as we continue to come out of COVID. How are we going to build a sustainable model that we can know that we can predict and make budgeting as well as staffing decisions year after year? And finally, what is the great opportunity that we have ahead of us? Because with every challenge, we can look at it as something that's going to take us to somewhere negative, or we can really think about the opportunities ahead. We never want to talk about budget unless we're also talking about our values, our vision, and our mission. The way we spend money, the way we allocate money directly reflects what we value as a school district. And so as we've set forth and as we work forward, we're always going back to our values of the whole child, safe and supportive learning environments, inclusive and equitable learning spaces for all students, and then of course, academic excellence. It's all of these working together, not in a hierarchy, that are at the top of our mind when we're thinking about budgets, staffing, allocation of resources, regardless of the funding source. When I was hired as superintendent, after the listening sessions in the community, one of the asks that our community had of the new superintendent would be someone who would be out in front and communicating in transparent and meaningful ways. Not just on one-offs and under one occasion, but in something that was more predictable. So when I was hired, I put forth, along with the help of our Director of Communications, Ian Henry, a communications plan. And in that communications plan, as you can see, there are 5 goals, but the one that's germane to tonight is really making sure that we're developing our partnerships with our community and our staff. And so we're thinking about internal and external communications. We've been out with this similar presentation in 4 of our 6 schools. We'll be down at Lake Ridge next week in Islander Middle School to wrap up our tour. And we also wanted certainly to bring this right to you as a community. So this is our continued commitment and our promise that as we start moving forward as a school district, we bring our community along and we ensure our staff is right there with us as we build transparency and trust. So let's take a look at our students right now. Our students are our biggest driver of revenue. We can always save our money or we can go find new students. That's really the best way to make money in public education. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk a little bit about our students.
As this slide shows, it's our trends by student FTE. FTE is full-time equivalent, and that's how we receive revenue from the state of Washington. Specifically, we see 17-18, our enrollment at 4,399 FTE, and that's pre-pandemic. If you know, and the slide, easily lays out for us, is a decline in our enrollment. Currently, for 22-23, we stand at 3,942 FTE, And as we look forward, we see a slight decline going on to 23-24, to 24-25, and 25-26. Now, the wisdom of our school board, we have contracted with 2 demographers, and those 2 individuals, those 2 companies will be providing to us a look at our 3 to 5 year to 10-year picture of where our enrollment will be. This slide is current enrollment by grade, gets a little more granular, but what you can see is this kind of trend of declining enrollment in our elementaries, but our current and high enrollment lies in our high school.
We indicate here these orange bars compared to the blue because those are our transition years. So when we're thinking about our kindergartners who have come in, how big is our kindergarten class relative to our 5th grade class? And then as our 5th graders next year become 6th grader, how do they compare to our 8th graders and our 8th grade to 9th grade, and then our outgoing seniors? And then it comes full circle, and we're looking at how large is that kindergarten class compared to the outgoing 12th grade class. For those of you who have been in the district for a number of years, this is the end of that bubble. We were building Northwood and looking at very crowded schools when we had 3 elementaries because of this large number. And as those students have matriculated out, we've seen that trend that we saw from our demographers of lower enrollment. So the lower enrollment wasn't just COVID, although that accelerated it. And now we continue to plan for the future. So public school funding, and this is a key aspect of tonight, is really trying to demystify how schools are funded in the state of Washington and why we face certain challenges and why we have certain opportunities. So we're going to begin, Matt, with some of our funding sources.
Like almost every school district in the state, we have 5 major funds that, well, run our district financially. Our major fund is our general fund. That's where everything emanates from, all of our programs, all of our operations, and that's where the major chunk of our revenue lives. Our second fund is our transportation fund. That's simply for big yellow buses and maintenance thereof. Third is our debt service fund. In 2014, Mercer Island passed a $98 million bond. With that, over the years, just like a mortgage in your house, we have to pay that off. Taxes are collected via King County and then paid out via our debt service fund. Our fourth fund is our capital projects and technology. Last year, the island passed a cap tech levy for 6 years. This is where that lives, and it goes to our technology throughout our district, whether it be the tablets that we use, computers that we use, or minor capital projects and maintenance throughout our buildings, throughout our district. And then finally, our ASB, our Associated Student Body Fund, that funds our clubs and athletics, etc. Our general fund revenue for 21-22, you can see some of our major sources via this pie graph. 22% is our local taxes and support. As we mentioned, our EP&O levy, our educational programs and operations levy. Obviously, we have federal general special purpose. That's about 7.7%. Those are those grants we receive from the federal government and the state to our district. And then state general and special purpose. This is apportionment, is what the state calls it. It's revenue per student, FTE, and staffing. And that accounts for obviously the majority of our funding and almost 70%. If we look at our expenditures, this is by object codes, an accounting term we use in school districts for our 21-22 school year. We can see that a majority of where we spend our money, almost 84%, is for our teachers, for our staff. 21%, almost 22% goes to benefits, 16.8% goes to salaries classified, and then 45.2% salaries certified, which is mainly our teaching staff. And they have other odds and ends such as purchase services. That's at 13.1% due to food service. We contract through Chartwells to feed our students lunches, breakfasts, etc. And that's why that's so large. This is a handy one. If you're a property owner on Mercer Island and you're listening to our presentation here tonight, you'll see where do my taxes go? Taxes go to a variety of different locations, whether that be the city of Mercer Island, Sound Transit, the Port of Seattle. But I want to direct your attention to this yellow slice of the pie, which is obviously the largest at 38%, but also the light blue slice of the pie at 21%. Pre-pandemic, pre-McCleary decision, we'll get a little bit into that a little bit later, we saw the state schools at 24%. Part of the McCleary decision was to fully fund basic education, or at least try to. And this is the slice of the pie the state collects from us islanders and then distributes it out, yes, to us, but also to the rest of the schools in the state. Pre-pandemic, we saw this pie was at 30%, now it's at 21%, because the state decided to cap our EP&O levy. That cap on our EP&O levy, educational programs and operations, as a part of that was the lesser of two items. It was either $2,500 per student or $2.50 per 1,000 of assessed valuation, which is what is the value of your home. Now, us on Mercer Island, we are a property rich, as they say, district. So we were affected by the lesser, which is the $2,500 per student. It should be noted that Seattle Public Schools via the legislature received the $3,000 per pupil. And then historical perspective. Prior to McCleary, prior to that levy cap, as I mentioned earlier, we saw we were collecting almost 17 million per the EP&O levy. And now with that cap in place, we see a $12.7 million levy, or about a a little bit over a $4 million loss to the district.
And I can't emphasize enough here down at the bottom that we just thank you, Mercer Island voters. Last year, as Matt was indicating, we passed the EP&O levy. We also passed a cap tech levy, and we passed them with over 70% support from our local community, which was the highest percentage in the state. It continues to say that our islanders support public education, they value education, and we take that extremely seriously. And you'll see why local support continues to be so important to the success of our school district. So a lot of parents, community members, staff, and others have talked about, well, why do we find ourselves in a financial situation right now that is not as favorable as the past? And when we start looking at that, there are several reasons for that. Following COVID, the federal government, through an act called the ESSER, they created funding and a funding source for states. And so the federal government directed relief dollars to the states to allocate out to school districts. The way they chose to allocate that is based on Title I funding. Title I funding is the funding that's generally associated with the number of students you have receiving free and reduced lunch. As a school district that has about 3% of our students meeting that category, we didn't receive nearly as much funding as other districts our size or certainly larger. To put it into perspective, a neighboring school district about our size received about $6 million. We received just over $1 million. The challenge for us, of course, is that COVID was still impacting our students. COVID was impacting our staff. And so as we started to look at that, we had to think about, well, what are we going to do to make sure that our students still receive the support they need? So what did we do? Our school board made the decision, along with the support of the district, to lower our fund balance. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but as Matt was sharing earlier, that fund balance is really the savings account. And so rather than receiving money from the state or federal government in ESSER, we chose to use our fund balance to ensure that we maintained higher staffing levels, we maintained more resources in our schools. So as our students were coming back, either during online learning or certainly when we were opening the schools, that we'd be ready and we'd have supports. But as you spend those dollars, of course, like a savings account, it's only one time. The other factor, or another factor, was the we missed on our enrollment. We thought more students might come back following the schools reopening. And so we over projected our student enrollment in the 21-22 school year. As we return back to our enrichment programs and operations levy, as that has reduced down, and because we base it on students instead of property values around the state and region, we've all seen them going up in recent years. But when you're like our district, unlike others, and you're collecting based on student enrollment, and that's going down, it's a bit of a double whammy. Another factor is just our staffing, and we need to continue to look at the number of students we have versus the number of staff that we have. And we need to do some course correction there. And so we need to continue to think about where are those areas where we may be able to cut back and where we will need to cut back in order to balance our budgets. Inflation, we've all certainly been hit by this at the local level, in our own pocketbooks, at the gas station, the grocery store. It certainly impacted us as well as we've gotten into our prices for gasoline, prices for other commodities for the school district. and then certainly rising staff costs. We'll show you a little bit more about this, but in and around the region, staff costs have also increased tremendously. And then finally, if we look at last year, you may have heard that we've had a $2 million loan that we took from ourselves. That $2 million loan was to help us to make sure that we got through the end of last year as we were spending down that fund balance, but that loan has to be repaid. And so I am pleased to report that under the leadership of Matt and Kay and the business team, as well as others, we are well on our way to paying that back. And essentially what we do is we took money out of our Cap Tech levy, put it into our general fund, and now we'll pay that Cap Tech levy back. So we're on pace to take care of that this year, but it certainly is another impact facing us. So we're going to turn our attention back to what is the state fund versus what are we funding here at the local levy or at the local level. That's in our levies, our donations, and other ways that we're using resources. So I'm going to bring in Kay to talk a little bit about our state allocation versus what does it really cost.
Thank you, Fred. First off, with the McCleary Act, the state went away from funding people based on their experienced teachers and went to a state average. So what that did, it took all the teachers throughout Washington state and came up with the average, which is currently close to $69,000 for an annual salary. Then they did a regionalization factor, which Mercer got 18%. Most of our teachers make more than we receive, so you get a gap in funding there. The state only pays for a prototypical model, which does not fully staff a district. That's part of our problem right now. And we are looking at ways to try to get closer to the prototypical school. But they haven't reevaluated the prototypical school for, I think, up to 20 years, and it's not at the levels we need it to be able to run a school district. Next one. That's where the levy comes into account. As I was saying, we are only funded for 273 teachers or full-time staff. That's everybody in the district. Currently, we have 424 employees at full-time. So there's 151 staff members that we try to pay with local levy funds. The other part was the state inflation, the 5.5 IPD they applied last year, of course, was only applied to the prototypical school funding. So therefore, we didn't receive 5.5 on those positions that are paid by other sources. So that's how there became a bigger gap. And so if we were to spread the IPD equally and account for all staff, that IPD really goes down to about a 3.2 when we apply it across the district. Another great thing the state did about 4 years ago is they took over our health insurance. So the state sets the rate, they go out and negotiate for us. We get funded about 3.5 because it's only based on the actual prototypical school, but everybody in the district gets health benefits. Part-time people used to only get part of the benefits. Now they get like they're a full-time employee. This created a bigger gap in our benefits. It actually cost the districts about 5.1 million. So we have to come up with 1.6 million to cover the benefits for everybody. We used to do pooling. And so when someone refused the benefits, it would go into a pooling and it would be allocated out to staff. But now, because part-time people receive full-time benefits, it has increased the gap by now we're about $800,000 that we have to come up to be able to make up that gap. This is a prototypical school. This is how the state funds our schools based on the number of students that we have. So if you're an elementary school, you can look at this chart and you can see if you have 333 students in an elementary school, you qualify for 1.25 principals. But if you go down to the area that's really shortened by the state, it's in your counselors, your nurses, psychologists, social workers, and even paraeducators. If you go up to the middle school, my greatest point on this one is look at the psychologist. We qualified for not even a psychologist for 10 minutes a day. It's quite sad what the state is actually funding for mental health for students. Here is the other one, the cost per program that we actually fund and the state doesn't fund. If you look at the first one, special education, every student deserves an equitable education. The state, we receive about 8.3 million, but we spend over 11 million to educate special ed students. Learning assistance, that's our LAP program. That is to give struggling students more help. Again, the state only gives us 96. We spend about 254. And you can go on down the list. You can see the shortfalls there. Extracurricular, which your tax dollars go to help pay. And it's great to have all these things for students to participate in. But the district picks up about 847,000 on that one. Transportation is another cost. This will hopefully get more even with the state this coming year. They're upping the transportation, trying to get all districts at 100%. So hopefully that 300,000 that we had a shortfall last year will not be that large this year. We're waiting till January to see the apportionment come out, and we'll see what happens there. As I mentioned in a prior slide, health benefits, there's a gap there. The state does not fund for the positions that aren't covered by prototypical school. And the extra funding that we received this year for social emotional health, as you can see, the state still did not fully fund that. We have over 27 FTE going to those type of positions. The state only funds 14.7, which is about 1.5 million that we pay for.
As we start looking at it, I'll have Kay continue, but especially at that bottom one, right down here with our physical, social, emotional health, it's always important that I think about our local legislators. And because we have two in the 41st district that live right here on Mercer Island, I certainly want to thank both of them. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on in solutions, but Representative Sen and Senator Wellman have both been instrumental in increasing these costs related to physical, social, and emotional health. In fact, they sponsored bills that will continue to give us support. But just rounding it out and going back to what Kay is saying, you can see the discrepancy in the deltas here for us, that it requires not just that state funding. And when you go back to that pie chart that Matt talked about, you saw the big part that's the yellow, and that's the state taxes that are going out. And this really speaks to that revenue doesn't necessarily come back. And then when they shrunk down our ability to raise money and look to our voters through the EP&O, and they shrunk that local assistance, it really made it challenging for us. So we have challenges here. Other districts have challenges, and we continue to find creative ways to get through that. Rising costs, especially for staffing. If we take a look here at this graph and we consider what have we seen in staffing, right after the McCleary decision, if we go right before it, during the recession and coming out of it, there were a series of years. When I was first coming into the district, 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, the state wasn't providing any increases for staff. Any increases that were going to staff were really on the backs of the local the local voters through our local efforts. And so when we did see the McCleary money and we saw greater dollars coming in from the state, we certainly saw elevated costs throughout, not just our region, but across the state. And we were finally looking at trying to raise and elevate the wages of all of our staff members, especially to meet up with rising costs in the region. Over time, we've seen inflation continue to go up. In fact, inflation over that period of time since McCleary has just been over 18%. For our Mercer Island Education Association, that's who represent our certificated members as well as our classified. On those two sides there, we've seen certain increases there. Our certificated staff with a almost 32% increase in wages, our classified staff at 40%. And then we have a group of non-representative staff as well. Those are in our maintenance and operations team, many people who work right here in the central office, and then all of our principals. So as we look towards the future, we have to continue to find ways that we're going to attract and retain the very best educators and people in our district. And the way we're going to do that is we've got to continue to think about the market and where we can continue to stay competitive. If we take a look at another way of where that state versus contributions versus what it really costs, want to turn our attention here. In the state's formula, a certificated employee, and we have nurses who are certificated, speech language pathologists, teachers, and others, but they provide about $69,000 there. Because we live in our region, which is a higher cost of living area, we actually get an 18% increase for that. And then you can compare it across the classified and administrators as well. So what does this mean for Mercer Island? If we really just start here with the teachers and our certificated staff, that's $68,937. When you multiply it times the 18%, then we're looking at $81,345 that we receive for each of our staff that's part of that prototypical school model. Again, it's not all staff. We then apply our benefits of $16,270. And when we take a look at what the state provides versus what it actually costs, we start to look at what the true cost is. And that is each of our staff, even in the prototypical school model, is still $30,000 short, which is what we're working on and that we pick up here at the local level. So as we look at our fund balance, that fund balance is a critical measure. And this is something we're looking at very closely. As we mentioned earlier on this evening, we talked about the use of fund balance in a very appropriate way to make sure that we were continuing to offer the very best for our students as we recovered from the pandemic. As you recall, I had mentioned that some districts our size received $6 million versus our just over $1 million. Again, that's because of that Title I factor and that we simply don't qualify for as much revenue or as much funding to support Title I. I am certainly not advocating that other districts didn't deserve that either. However, when you take into account the impacts of COVID, social, emotional, academic, our kids were impacted too. But that fund balance is our cash in the bank. That's our savings account. And our Board of Education has operational expectation 7 of the superintendent, which says that they're looking for a fund balance and their expectation is that it's between 8 and 10%. That's so that if we have some sort of catastrophic event or we have a need, that we do have the reserves on hand to be able to make payments. It also, as our business team reminds me, it's an important factor in payroll and making sure that we can make payroll for when the state may not provide us as much. They don't fund us the same amount every month, so we have to continue to play to our strengths, which is how do we manage that money over time. But we're trying to get back to that 8 to 10%. And here's where we are now, Matt.
Taking a look at this side, we see the historical fund balance percentage. We started 18-19, going to 21-22, and the slide effectively speaks for itself. You can see where our fund balance has taken down to, from a 7.7 million high in 18-19 to a low of 1.7 million at the year end 21-22. But we're not in it alone. Other districts throughout our region are seeing the same effects, whether that be COVID, whether it be a decrease in enrollment, whether that be the levy cap. And here's a neighboring district. You can see where their fund balance has taken them from 2012, 2013 to a high of 2019, 2020. And they're projecting a significantly drop in fund balance to 25 to 26.
So what are the solutions? What do we do? One of those solutions that we have and that we're working with Representative Sen, Representative Tai, as well as Senator Wellman, and hoping that we garner other support is really through legislative action. There are a number of bills and priorities that will be discussed in Olympia. The session opened last week and will continue through April, assuming they don't extend. If they do, we will continue to push and make the case that Mercer Island School District needs funding too. One of those is that regionalization. You recall I had mentioned that because we're in King County and we're in a high cost of living area, that we receive an increase. We want to maintain at minimum that 18% regionalization factor. Another priority for us is to make sure that we fund special education. We had shown the slide that between $3 and $4 million is what we need, what we come up with out of our local assistance and our local efforts. We're looking to the state to pick up a larger proportion to continue to fund special education. Our director of special education, Dr. Suyan Booby, last week was testifying in hearings with committees. She was on committee hearings again today, making the case for Mercer Island, as well as other districts all around the state. We also need support, as Kay Adams was mentioning. We need support with that prototypical school model. 273 full-time employees is simply not enough to run a school district and provide the services and supports that our students need and that they deserve. So we're looking for continued support, just like Representative Sen and Senator Wellman have done in the past. We're going to be looking for even more so that our state is actually funding the positions that we need. And lastly, we're going to be looking at our legislators thinking about that levy authority. If we've gone down in time and as we've reduced our ability to collect at the local level while costs have been going up, again, we're getting hit on both sides. And so what we're looking at is, can we get some levy authority to raise that with the blessing certainly of our public and our local voters, so that we can once again, through especially our EP&O levy, that enrichment programs and operation levy, that we can really start generating more revenue and putting it right into our classrooms and our schools. There are some things that I asked Kay and Matt to do as soon as they came in the district. We've had a wonderful opportunity to, we have only one remaining out of 5 staff members who is a tremendous asset to our district. But since March, we've been able to bring in 4 new members to our finance team. And so Kay and Matt have been hard at work trying to make some changes. So I'm going to have Kay talk to you a little bit about how we are starting to reprioritize and make new commitments.
Well, my first responsibility or job given to me was to be able to pay back the loan taken from capital. So I have been looking throughout our expenditures through the 3 of our main funds, which was the general, CapTech, and ASB. So I've been doing an accounting audit on all of those funds, looking at all our GLs, other things, to see a way that I could possibly bring in or charge CapTech for positions that could legally be funded by that. So that was one of my main jobs right now. Next up. We are actually going to start a budget process where we will be going out to each building, going over what they need to be able to operate next year, and doing some strategies on how we can stretch a dollar as much as we possibly can. And looking at our spending trends. Hiring and position reviews, as we get attrition where people retire or if people choose to go to another district, we're going to review each position carefully to see if it needs to be filled or if it's a position that we could leave unfilled for a little while. Adhering to the timelines on accounting, we are trying every day, every month, reviewing our purchase orders. They're how we pay things to make sure that what we have in our accounting system is accurate. And that way we can make sure that we are spending our money correctly and in a nice flow, that there's not going to be any big peaks or lows. And we're trying to build we are building understanding with the buildings and with you as a community on what we're doing to keep our budgets and funding strong. I believe teaching people about budget and funding is fundamental at a school district so they understand how the money comes in and how it goes out. And we are trying our best to make everything as simple as possible so everyone in the district can understand and ask questions if they need to.
So the challenges that we've been facing are not necessarily new in terms of how schools have been funded. The McCleary decision in going back to 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17 was really based on the fact that the state has not been fulfilling its paramount duty, which is to educate children. That continues today in our mind, and those challenges are ahead. I am proud of the creativity and the stewardship that our school district has maintained over the years. But I'm even more excited about the future because I think we can continue through some of those changes to be even more dynamic, to be even more responsive. And so when I think about that, I start thinking about what are our commitments, not just fiscally, but our commitments as a school district. And first and foremost, that's to our students. One of the things that continues to amaze me is how talented, how smart, how wise our children are. They give me great hope for the future, certainly in ways that maybe we as adults have not done as well, but our commitment will always be to our students. It's also to our staff. We know that if we have the very best educators in front of our children, driving the buses, in health rooms, here at the central office supporting as our principals, that we're going to continue to have the top quality education that our students need and deserve. And that begins with making sure that our staff knows that we're committed to them. And our families. It's not just about voting yes in levies. Our tremendous support through our PTAs, our schools foundations, the positivity and support that you provide your children each and every day they come home and as they leave for school, the foundations that you're building are not taken for granted. And that partnership between our school district and your families is absolutely paramount to the success of those students. We're also committed to excellence. It's excellence in financial stewardship. It's excellence in the classroom. It's excellence in our hiring process and the way that we're continuing to deliver professional development. And so making sure that we don't ever lose sight of this and let fiscal resources become a barrier to any of these. And certainly being leaders in the region, leaders in our profession, leaders amongst our public schools and our private schools. As an education institution, as an education district, we know we can lead the charge and not let barriers such as fiscal restraints get in the way of that. So it's about today, it's about tomorrow, and it's about making sure that we're together. What can we do? What can we all do? Well, one of those is always continue to think about how do we support our local efforts? How do we support our PTAs? How do we support our Mercer Island Schools Foundation? They offer and we offer a breakfast and that will be coming up in April, but it's our youth and family services who provide counselors in our schools and they have a breakfast. They're giving from the heart breakfast coming up in February. Our booster clubs for enrichment and athletics, all of those dollars that are generated stay right here on Mercer Island. And I can't state how important those local resources are. How else can we do this? We can be advocating with our legislators. As I mentioned, we'll be testifying and working together down in Olympia, talking to legislators, helping them understand the challenges we have and how through simple legislative action, we can do even better. And that comes into our PTAs who help lead the charge, our district. And again, I can't say enough about the 41st District's representatives down in Olympia who meet with our school board. They meet with us as school leaders and they are champions. So we'll be working with them and we'll be reaching out to you as community members to help you, to help us as we start to think about advocacy in Olympia. What else can you do? We never know as educators when we're going to make a difference in the life of a child. That's what we want to do every day. We don't always get to see the products, the fruits of our labor. But when we hear from parents, when we hear from former students that we are making that difference, it gives us that energy to keep going. We certainly want criticism where we need to get better, but I also encourage us to think about how do we share with staff members how they're making a difference for our children too. That really propels us forward. Find a neighbor, a friend who may not be as connected with the school district. If they're feeling on the outside, let us know, how do we bring them in? One of the things that we do, and a question that I saw come through tonight is, how do we know where our students have gone who have left, or do we reach out to those families? 2 times a year, we survey all of our families who have left. We survey a group, a cohort who may have left in the fall and the winter, and then the spring and the summer. and we're asking them questions. What could have we done better, or what did we do well? And so we're reaching out, and that valuable feedback certainly helps us to know what should we keep doing and what can we change and stop doing as we're moving forward. But I ask our community to help us remain committed and connected. And if there's someone on the outside looking in, let's bring them in. And finally, keep supporting your children each and every day. It is a tremendous privilege and an opportunity to be an educator in this district. I chose to come in and to apply to be the superintendent, and I'm thrilled that the school board chose me. But I chose to stay because of the relationships. It's the people, it's the parents, it's the students, and it's the staff who keep me here and keep me energized. And so I'm going to continue working side by side with all of our staff and all of you as parents at home, our students in the classroom. We've got to amplify what we're doing great. There are plenty of challenges out there. There are plenty of reasons to be concerned, but there are more reasons to be hopeful. Public education has an opportunity right now to really continue to elevate and to lift our students up and propel them into the world with the skills and the knowledge necessary, the dispositions to make great decisions. We've got to tell that story. I need to be out as the superintendent. Our teachers, our principals, and others, we need to be sharing the great things that we're doing. And then thinking about how do we get better? It's not just about saying what we're doing well today, but how are we going to get better in the future? Yes, we have budget constraints, but those haven't kept us from being excellent in the past, and they're definitely not going to keep us from being excellent in the future. And then finally, we want to make sure everyone's thriving. Our schools are thriving, and how do we know? Because our students are thriving. Our staff have the resources they need to meet the needs of the student where they are and take them to where they can be. And so I am incredibly hopeful for the future, that while we have challenges fiscally, I'm hoping this evening you have a better idea and a better understanding of how schools are funded in the state, how complex it can be, but how important it is to come together as a community, continue rallying around our schools, supporting our schools, and working together. So on behalf of all of the students, the staff, and the entire district, I want to thank people for tuning in this evening. We will be putting this online and posting it. We'll put our PowerPoint online for you to view and for anyone who may have missed tonight. With that, I do want to address some of the questions that have come in, and we won't be able to get to all of them, but ones that we can't, and we'll kind of batch together and try to put together as an FAQ. So one of those gets really at that lower enrollment and what's causing that. As we said, we certainly saw a dip because of COVID. Many districts experienced this. There are very few who have actually seen growth. Some of it was families going to private schools. We have over 500 students who live in this zip code right now who choose private options. And there are plenty of reasons why a family might do that. We won't stop continuing to amplify our voice to see when those fifth graders are going to sixth grade, there's oftentimes a choice for our families. How do we do a better job amplifying our voice and ensuring community members that their public option is a great option too, if not a better option? But I certainly respect that some, for either religious reasons or beliefs, or perhaps that we haven't met needs, have made other choices, and we'll continue to reach out. But our demographers, as Matt was saying, we are really looking to them. They're going to provide us with some great information. I believe in an upcoming school board meeting as early as our February 9th meeting, we'll be showcasing what the demographers are saying of what can we expect to see in the next 3, 5, or 10 years. So we'll learn even more about that one. Another question that came through is, if we're going to be looking to the legislature to raise our levy authority, does that mean more taxes here on Mercer Island? And frankly, yes. That would require certainly a partnership with the community to look towards that. But I'm confident that we can continue to demonstrate to our community that the value and the investment is there, but it's going to take honesty and transparency like this. Not all of the slides are ones that we are particularly proud of right now. We don't want our fund balance where it is. We're going to grow that, and that will return back to that 8 to 10%. It won't be in a year because we don't want to decimate programs and opportunities for students. So it's going to take several years on that recovery effort. But as we do, we won't stop being innovative, offering new courses, bringing in new textbooks and new technology for our students, those things will not stand in the way. Matt, is there one that you've seen come through that you wanted to address? I don't want to put you on the spot right there, but.
I think we can clarify the yellow versus blue pies. If the yellow is going to the state, does that count as double dipping? Not necessarily. The state sees that as their obligation via the state constitution to fully fund basic education. For us, it's the ask of our community, whether that be the CapTech levy or the EP&O, Educational Programs and Operation levy. It's not necessarily double dipping. It's what we need to do to bridge the gap from state funding to local funding for the level of service and excellence that we provide here with the Mercer Island School District.
A question that I also saw come through, it has to do with who kind of falls underneath certificated educators. And that depends. Some of our educators like myself, I have a certificate and I'm paid on the certificated side. Matt, on the other hand, does not have a certificate under the umbrella of public education. So he's on the non-rep side. But we do have a difference. Certainly we have administrators who are certificated, or principals and others. And so when we're talking about certificated, we try to be sensitive to some of those are represented by MIEA, our Mercer Island Education Association, while others are not with non-rep. So we do try to be careful, but it can get confusing on who needs a certificate and for what purposes.
Question number 2 there.
Go ahead.
Why did neighboring a similar sized district receive $6 million in contracts to ours? Basically, it's based on our poverty level within our district. We have a very low poverty level, hence via ESSER funds, which is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. The federal government dictated that we, as a low poverty district, do not receive as much funds as another neighboring district. That's not to say our needs weren't the same during COVID, but it's what the guidelines and I guess the rubrics were via the federal government.
Another question about our levy, particularly that EP&O levy. Going back to the beginning, just a refresher on what Matt had said about that. We collect on the $2,500 per student. And so a question that came through is, are we collecting the max? So in other words, when we went out to the voters last February, there was a certain amount that we had to state that we would collect and that it wouldn't exceed that. And so coming up in the outward years of the levy, because of inflation, and we didn't anticipate that, and because of anticipating perhaps more aggressive decline in enrollment, we are at a point where we're not necessarily maxing out that levy right now. And so those projections in terms of what we went out for, that really comes into it. Inflation plus, actually, we've maintained students. We thought we'd see a steeper decline this year. We actually leveled off, and we're going to be looking to our demographers to see what might be coming next. Maybe time for 1 or 2 more.
Absolutely.
Let's go up a little bit, Ian.
I think there's an easy question right there. A little slightly down. There we go. What does property rich mean? I use that term. Mercer Island, unlike probably many other school districts and areas throughout the state, has high property values, hence property rich district.
Great. I think we'll wrap it up there. We have some questions that we can always get back to, but as you leave this evening, I hope that you're leaving with a couple things. One is funding is really complicated in our state, and that we need greater assistance from our state to help us with that. But more importantly, I hope you realize that we've been doing really creative and outstanding work with the constraints that we have. And as we look towards the future, there is nothing that's going to stop us from continuing to do great things. We're going to need partnership. We may need some help with legislation down in Olympia. But more importantly, we need families to continue doing what they're doing, raising exceptional children, sending them to us each and every day, eager to learn, so that we can wrap around them, provide the supports they need and the services, and send them back to you with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to make a difference in the world, not just when they graduate from Mercer Island High School, though that's the ultimate goal, but making sure that our students are making a difference by broadcasting their voices today, tomorrow, and into the future. So with that, on behalf of Matt, Kay, and our entire team, thanks for joining us on our webinar tonight. Go Islanders.